My name is Dr. Isabella Valencia, and for the past 5 years, my family has treated me like I'm still the little girl playing dress-up with a toy stethoscope. Every family gathering becomes another opportunity for my older brother Marcus to remind everyone that I'm just playing doctor, while he builds his real career in tech. The birthday cake was chocolate with vanilla frosting, Dad's favorite, and the living room was packed with extended family, neighbors, and Marcus's colleagues from his startup. At 35, Marcus had mastered the art of making every family celebration about his latest business venture, and tonight was no exception. Isabella's still in school, he announced to a circle of his tech bros, his voice carrying that particular condescension he'd perfected since childhood. 8 years now, and she's still not done with her little medical program. I was sitting across the room, helping my niece with her homework, but Marcus's voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. The little medical program he was referring to was my residency at St. Catherine's Medical Center, where I'd just completed my fellowship in cardiovascular surgery. But explaining the complexity of medical training to Marcus was like trying to perform surgery with crayons. 8 years, gasped Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. Isn't that a bit excessive? Marcus shrugged with practiced nonchalance. She's still living in fantasy land, playing doctor while the rest of us are building real careers and making real money. Dad, seated in his favorite recliner with a paper crown from the party store, chuckled uncomfortably. Marcus, your sister is very dedicated to her studies. Dedicated to avoiding the real world, Marcus corrected, taking a swig from his craft beer. I dropped out of college junior year to start my first company. Sold it for $2 million by the time I was 28. Meanwhile, Isabella's still asking Dad for gas money. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of conversations that had paused to listen. My teenage cousin Sophia looked up from her phone, sensing drama. My mother shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly wishing this conversation would end. Medical school is different, Mijo, Mom said weakly, but even she sounded like she was making excuses. Different how? Marcus's voice grew louder, more theatrical. He was performing now, enjoying his audience of impressed colleagues. She's 32 years old and still in school. When I was 32, I was already running my second startup. I continued helping Sophia with her algebra, my hands steady despite the familiar anger building in my chest. 5 years of this. 5 years of Marcus dismissing my achievements while I worked 100-hour weeks saving lives. 5 years of watching him parade around as the family success story while I'd been promoted to chief of cardiovascular surgery at one of the state's premier medical centers. The thing about Isabella, Marcus continued, warming to his theme, is that she's always been a dreamer. Even as a kid, she had these grandiose plans. Remember when she wanted to be a princess? Now she wants to be a doctor. Same fantasy, different costume. His startup buddies laughed appreciatively. One of them, a guy with a man bun and expensive sneakers, nodded sagely. Medical school is just extended adolescence. Avoiding real responsibility. Exactly, Marcus said, pointing at him like he'd made a brilliant observation. While I was building businesses, creating jobs, contributing to the economy, Isabella's been hiding in classrooms pretending she's going to save the world. I looked up from Sophia's homework to find half the room watching me, waiting for a reaction. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, a few barely concealed amusement at seeing the family overachiever taken down a peg. She'll figure it out eventually, Marcus added with a dismissive wave. Some people are just late bloomers. Maybe she'll become a nurse or something more realistic. That was the line that did it. Not because nursing wasn't honorable, I had nothing but respect for nurses, but because Marcus said it like settling for less was inevitable for me. Like ambition beyond his understanding was automatically delusion. I stood up slowly, folding Sophia's completed homework neatly beside her textbook. You're absolutely right, Marcus, I said quietly. I should definitely be more realistic about my career goals. His eyebrows raised, surprised by my agreement. Finally, she listens to reason. Speaking of which, I continued, pulling on my jacket, I should probably head back to work. I have some important responsibilities to handle. Work? Man bun guy scoffed. What work? Studying for another exam? I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed all evening. Something like that. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing surgical schedules in my office when my pager buzzed with an emergency code. Multiple trauma victims from a highway accident were incoming, including one patient who would require immediate cardiovascular surgery. As chief of cardiovascular surgery at St. Catherine's, I'd handled hundreds of emergency cases. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the particular timing, coming just days after the hospital board had officially announced my promotion to chief of medicine, a position that would make me the youngest department head in the hospital's history. I was reviewing the trauma bay reports when Dr. Amanda Pierce, our head of emergency medicine, appeared in my doorway looking unusually flustered. "Dr. Valencia, we need you in trauma 2 immediately. The patient needs emergency surgery, but there's a complication." I grabbed my tablet and followed her down the hall. "What kind of complication?" "The patient is refusing to consent to surgery unless he speaks to a real doctor. He keeps saying the attending looks too young and demanding someone with more experience." I suppressed a smile. After 5 years as an attending and 2 years as department chief, I still got patients who assumed I was a medical student or nurse. It came with the territory of being a young woman in surgery. "Has he been informed about the severity of his condition?" Dr. Chen explained everything. "Torn aorta, internal bleeding, maybe 4 hours before it becomes inoperable. But the patient insists on waiting for someone more senior." We reached Trauma Bay 2, and I could hear a familiar voice through the partially open door demanding to speak to whoever's in charge of this place. My stomach dropped as recognition hit me like a physical blow. I pushed open the door to find Marcus lying on the gurney, his face pale but his voice as arrogant as ever. He was arguing with Dr. Chun, an incredibly competent surgeon who looked about ready to sedate him just to shut him up. "I want to speak to the chief of surgery," Marcus was saying. "This kid can't be more than 25. I'm not letting some medical student practice on me." Dr. Chun, who was actually 38 and had trained at Johns Hopkins, maintained his professional composure. "Sir, I assure you I'm fully qualified to perform this procedure. However, given the complexity of your case, Dr. Valencia will be overseeing your surgery." "Dr. Valencia?" Marcus's voice perked up slightly. "Finally, someone with experience. When can I meet him?" I stepped into his line of sight, still wearing my surgical scrubs from the previous case, my name tag clearly visible on my chest. "Hello, Marcus." The transformation on his face was immediate and spectacular. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally horror as the implications sank in. "Isabella? What are you doing here? Are you volunteering or something?" Dr. Chun looked between us with obvious confusion. "Dr. Valencia, do you know this patient?" "He's my brother," I said simply, pulling up his chart on my tablet. "Marcus Valencia, 35 years old, blunt force trauma to the chest, suspected aortic tear." "Your brother?" Dr. Chen's eyebrows shot up. "The one who—" "Yes," I said, cutting him off before he could finish the sentence. The entire hospital staff knew about Marcus's birthday performance. In a building full of medical professionals who'd sacrificed years of their lives to save others, his playing doctor comment had become something of a legend. Marcus was staring at me like I'd materialized from thin air. "But you're a student. You're still in school." "I'm the chief of cardiovascular surgery," I said, reviewing his vitals on the monitor. "As of last week, I'm also the chief of medicine for this hospital." The silence in the trauma bay was deafening. Dr. Chin coughed to cover what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. The nurses had all found sudden reasons to check equipment and avoid eye contact. "That's impossible," Marcus said weakly. "You were just at Dad's birthday party complaining about gas money." "I wasn't complaining about gas money," I corrected. "Mom asked if I needed anything, and I said I was fine. Which I am, considering the hospital provides me with a car allowance as part of my chief of medicine package." His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But you said you were still in school." "I said I was still learning." "Which I am. Medicine is a field where you never stop learning." I looked at his chart again. "Speaking of which, you have a torn aorta that needs immediate surgical repair. The procedure will take approximately 4 hours, and your survival odds are excellent if we operate within the next hour." "You're going to operate on me?" "I'm going to lead the surgical team, yes. Unless you'd prefer to wait for someone more experienced, in which case you'll likely die before they arrive." Dr. Chin stepped forward. "Mr. Valencia, your sister is one of the most skilled cardiovascular surgeons on the West Coast. She's performed this exact procedure dozens of times." "But she's younger than me," Marcus protested weakly. "By 3 years," I said. "Which means I've spent the last decade training while you were building apps. Now, do you consent to surgery, or would you like me to call Dad and explain why you refused treatment from your Fantasyland sister?" The fight went out of him completely. You're really a doctor. I'm really a doctor. Chief of medicine. Chief of medicine. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, I saw the scared little boy he'd been before he learned to compensate with arrogance. Isabella, I'm sorry. For everything I said at the party, for all the times I called you a dreamer. I felt the familiar professional calm settle over me, the same feeling I got before every major surgery. Personal feelings had no place in the operating room. Apology accepted, I said simply. Now let's save your life. The surgery was textbook perfect. 4 hours of meticulous repair work, with Marcus's torn aorta reconstructed using a technique I'd pioneered during my fellowship. The entire surgical team worked with precision, and by the time we finished, I was confident he'd make a full recovery. When Marcus woke up in the ICU, the first thing he saw was my face. I was checking his post-operative vitals, still in my surgical scrubs with my hair pulled back under a cap. How do you feel? I asked. Like I got hit by a truck, he said groggily. Which I guess I did. The surgery went perfectly. Full recovery expected within 6 weeks. He stared at me for a long moment. You saved my life. That's what doctors do. Bella, I've been an ass. I pulled up a chair beside his bed. Yes, you have. For years. I convinced myself that what I was doing was more important, more real. But you've been saving lives while I've been building apps. Both are important, I said. The world needs technology and medicine. But I made you feel small for choosing something bigger than myself. I thought about all the family gatherings, all the dismissive comments, all the times he'd made me question my own choices. Yes, you did. How can I make it up to you? I smiled, the first completely genuine smile I'd given my brother in years. Start by getting better. Then maybe try treating me like the accomplished professional I am instead of the little sister who annoys you. 3 days later, Marcus was discharged with a clean bill of health and a prescription for humility. The story of his surgery had spread through our family network faster than hospital gossip, and by the time he was ready to go home, our parents had learned the truth about my career. Mom cried when she realized she'd been making excuses for a daughter who was actually the youngest chief of medicine in the hospital's 127-year history. Dad, typically, just hugged me and said he'd always known I was special. Marcus, for his part, became my biggest advocate. His startup buddies got regular updates about my surgical innovations. His social media, previously devoted to entrepreneurship tips, now featured proud posts about his genius sister who saves lives for a living. The real change, though, was in how he looked at me. No more condescension, no more dismissive comments about my choices. He'd finally learned to see me as I actually was. Not the little girl playing dress-up, but a woman who dedicated her life to healing others. And sometimes, when I was having a particularly difficult day in surgery, I'd remember the look on his face when he realized that his life was in the hands of his Fantasyland sister. It reminded me that the best revenge wasn't proving people wrong. It was becoming so successful that their opinions stopped mattering entirely. After all, when you're saving lives, other people's small-mindedness becomes irrelevant. The only approval that matters is your own, and the knowledge that every day, you're making a difference that extends far beyond family drama and birthday party politics.